not enough to survive in this racialized world, we are learning together to thrive. This is Race, Health, and Happiness, and I'm your host, Dr. O. Today, my guest is Marlon Palmer, aka That Dude McFly, who is a Torontonian comedian and YouTuber of Jamaican descent who produces comedic skits, song parodies, and rants, which have earned him more than 170,000 subscribers and 23.5 million views to date. He is a self-proclaimed class clown turned actor who has hosted countless galas, talent shows, and parties in Toronto and internationally. Marlon has a podcast called Extra Gravy, where he and his co-hosts and guests talk about everything in pop culture while emphasizing Black perspectives and tackle more serious social issues, all while using lighthearted debate and humor. Welcome, Marlon.
Thanks for having me. Yeah. That was great. That was so nice.
Well, it's all true. It's all you. And I am delighted to have you here. I'm a fan of your show.
Thank you.
Yeah, podcaster to podcaster. All right. So let's dive into things because like now you're in my home turf, right? Right?
Yes.
So the first question I ask all guests is, what is your superpower?
My superpower, I guess like making people laugh, but also just distracting people from their problems. I feel like that's, if I were to break it down, that's like the best thing I could say to encapsulate everything that I do. I'm just distracting people from their life.
Right? Yes. And it's nice. And obviously people are responding. So yeah, no, definitely we appreciate that. Now, speaking of superpower, in one of your TikTok posts, like it was during the pandemic, I think, you mentioned that if there was a superpower you could have, it would be white privilege.
Oh, yes. Yes. Some of the best. Come on. Look at Batman, just thriving. Entire franchise. Yeah.
So if you had like that superpower, what would you do with it?
Batman. I'd be Batman. Legit. Everything he does. He has no real power. He's just rich.
It's true. It's true. But he's like saving the day. Would you be saving the day or just throwing the party?
I mean, if beating up drug dealers in alleys is saving the day, then yeah, sure. Why not? Why not?
A little extra.
A little extra. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, actually, in that theme, let's think about, I always love also people's origin stories, right? Like, how you've come up in your work and that kind of thing. So I know your parents are Jamaican.
Yes.
But you were like born and raised here in Toronto.
I was born here, yeah.
Right. So I know you like originally grew up in like Scarborough, which is like a very, for those who don't know, a very like diverse, densely Black population within Toronto. And then you at a certain point moved to a part of the GTA called Vaughan.
Yes.
Which at the time was not diverse at all, I don't think. I
mean, it was more diverse than people thought. I'll put it that way. Okay. I think it had a long history of being predominantly Italian. Woodbridge and then Vaughan. But by the time I had moved up there, it was like a big influx of people moving from like Toronto in the inner city. So it's like, especially our school, Maple High, was the closest school in York region entirely to Toronto. Like it's not that, it wasn't that far. So everybody that was moving up was moving to around that area. Okay. I guess because it was cheaper and whatnot. And it was everything was brand new, developed. Like we didn't have, every school I went to was the first school. Like, I mean, they built it for us. So like we had to go to a different school because there's nothing in that area for so far. So the nearest school for us, public school wise, was half an hour away. So we'd have to take a bus and use their portables until our school was built. And then we moved into there. And then in high school, same thing.
That just sounds gross.
Yeah. Okay. And then high school, same thing. Because there's like all Catholic schools. Okay. Because of because of the heavy Italian influence of there's all Catholic schools. So it's like public schools weren't accessible at that time. Yeah. So we had to be in those portables. Like they weren't going to let us into the school unless we did prayer and all that stuff. So we had to be in the portables until they finished our school. And then the same thing happened with high school. There was no high school. So they built that, and we were the first ones at that high school as well.
So was the environment diverse? The reason I was asking, I'm curious, is because so I grew up in Montreal.
Yeah.
And at first I lived in a more densely, immigrant neighborhood, called NDG, right?
Okay.
So it was like, serious, like, there was like roaches and stuff. Like, it was like,
no frills. There's a no frills. Yes.
yes, right? So we were living that life. And then it was like the migration to the suburbs, right?
Okay.
Like the great, Black migration. And so moved into a predominantly like white neighborhood. And that's where I really felt
were they predominantly French speaking as well?
Correct. This is Quebec.
Oh, God bless. Thank you. Oh, man.
Thank you.
Wow. I see why. Okay. Yes. This is all making sense now.
It's about fighting
the Francophones.
Racism, right?
Yes. Okay.
I was like 6 years old and I was like, wow. Right.
Yeah.
Like, that was my life. So I was the only. But what I'm understanding is like you were part of like a larger kind of like migration where like, so in school, was it pretty diverse? Did you?
It was, yeah. Like I lived, my neighborhood was directly beside a newly built neighborhood with a mosque. So it was like entirely just Muslim community, basically.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of brown kids at my school. There was a lot of Asian people who had moved up there around the same time as us too. So it was just a mix of just that. It was like Black, brown, Asian for the most part, and then Italian and other white European countries and whatnot.
Pause. I think people underestimate the psychological impact of living in a neighborhood where you and your kids are exposed to high levels of anti-Black racism compared to living in a neighborhood that is diverse. Numerous studies in the UK and the US have shown that a Black person living in a predominantly white neighborhood is more likely to develop psychosis. In a published paper by Black psychiatrist Dr. Onye McKenzie, he states, and I quote, "Evidence demonstrates that the rate of mental illness is lower for Black and ethnic minority groups in areas where the density of the immigrant population is higher. So being in a more diverse community is protective for mental health. Case in point, I described my childhood, moving to a French-Canadian suburb and the isolation of being the only Black child, compared to Marlon's childhood, moving to a diverse suburb in the Greater Toronto area where he felt safe and supported. So what's my point? I'm not saying we have to live in diverse neighborhoods. We don't have to. But if you choose to live in a neighborhood where you are the only minority, be aware of the amount of anti-Black racism that your family might be exposed to, and be intentional about counteracting it in healthy ways by ensuring you seek out and strengthen validating relationships with folks within and particularly outside that neighborhood.
And so there was a lot of brown kids at my school. There was a lot of Asian people who had moved up there around the same time as us too. So it was just a mix of just that. It was like Black, brown, Asian for the most part, and then Italian and other white European countries and whatnot. But
and like how old were you at that time?
that was from grade 7 until end of high school.
Okay.
I didn't move to Toronto until I finished high school.
So where in that time, I'm guessing it's somewhere between elementary school and high school, you started to become a bit of like the class clown kind of vibe?
Yeah, it started honestly as long as I can remember. Like I was a kid that the aunts and uncles would put in the middle and say, entertain us now.
Oh, that's cute.
So it was like I was always that kid. I just loved attention. And it just did not help in school at all. Did not translate. They did not see my talents. They didn't appreciate the humor. No. Like they loved me. There's a thing. Like the teachers themselves liked me because I was cheeky. Like they could tell I was smart, but I just didn't apply myself to any of the actual work.
Right.
I just wanted to have fun all the time. So that's why they were always like disappointed more so. Yeah.
Okay. So like, I mean, what we know in Toronto and across North America is that, like Black boys tend to experience more adversity, being the target of the teachers and things like that. But sometimes, like you're saying, like that charm or something like that can offset it.
Oh, yeah.
So for you, did that help or did you see it happening to your Black peers? Like,
It depended on my teacher.
Did you notice anything?
It depended on my teacher, honestly. Because I remember in grade 6, I had a teacher that in my head, something about me just always said he doesn't like Black people. Like just something, I just felt it.
Okay.
And like the black kids were the ones that were always going into the hallway to write lines. Like I remember I spent a week in the hallway, not inside the classroom at all, because I had to write 1,000 lines. And it was just like, I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like I just said something. Like it's not that big of a deal. So I don't know. It's just that one particular teacher, but every other teacher for the most part was pretty like caring, compassionate, like pretty good. Yeah. Students, you'd have like one or two, but I don't know. For the most part, I had pretty good environments, kids-wise. I never really hung out with like the bad kids or anything like that. I was just wanting to have fun, right? So, yeah.
And so at what point did you kind of decide that you wanted to focus on, you know, like humor and YouTube and be out there as opposed to like follow? Because I know you dabbled in college a couple of times, right?
Yeah.
So when was that point for you deciding like, you know what, this is more for me to pursue comedy and entertainment as opposed to like the classroom?
It was honestly not until like 2016. Like I had done the Much Music VJ search in 2009 and I came in second. And then from there, I didn't know what to do with the following that I had gained from being on TV. And so I was on Twitter and just trying to entertain people on Twitter. And then I made the YouTube channel just for friends. Like it wasn't even supposed to be for anything like that.
Wow.
Like I think my first video was my friend's birthday at a hotel. We were just dancing and like I just put it up because it was funny. And we kept doing videos just for our friends, me and a bunch of my other boys. And other people started seeing it and they would go viral. And I'm like, what's the big deal? Like, I didn't understand what viral meant, what that was at that time. Nobody really did around that time. It was also new. So I didn't know it was a business. I didn't know I could make money from it. I just was doing it for fun for legit probably 5 years. Like I missed out on a lot of money. Some of my biggest videos I've never been paid for. So it's like,
you were just doing YouTube like for kicks?
It was just for fun. And I knew that it was getting me notoriety in the city.
Okay.
And that attention seeking is just like, oh, I can get people over here. Especially when people started like stopping me for pictures. I was like, oh, okay, I got to keep doing this. Like, this is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember the story where like, I think you'd been working as a dishwasher.
Yeah. That's when I decided full time. Yeah.
Okay.
I was working as a dishwasher and I went on break to get some lunch. And like 4 or 5 people stopped me for pictures. And I was just like, I'm in my dishwashing uniform. This is very odd, right? And it's just like, it was just such a juxtaposition. So I was just like, this doesn't feel right. Like, I got to figure this out. And I hated my job, obviously. And so I left there and I made a video every day, sometimes 2 videos a day just to make my rent. And then once I made it, I was like, okay, I could do this. Like, this is way easier.
Once you realize you can monetize it, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And it took me years to figure that out.
Okay. So like along that journey, because I know like, for instance, like when I watch like Extra Gravy or like some of your work on TikTok, like you do get into issues of, you know, like race and racism. So I'm just wondering, like in Toronto as a Black man, either during your journey through school or, you know, now becoming more of a formal like stand-up comedian and that kind of work, have you experienced challenges as a Black man, like navigating?
Yeah, definitely. Like, especially as an influencer, like you don't get paid as much as your white counterparts, even though they're doing half as much the work. Like,
that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
They just
How does that happen? Like,
well, it's like there's been different instances where a Black creator was working on the same campaign as a white creator, and they just so happened to be friends. And I think the agencies did not expect them to compare or talk about their rates. And so there's been hundreds of incidences where someone has been like, oh yeah, they're giving me $800. And like, the other person's like, oh, I'm getting 10,000. And it's like, what's happening? My numbers are the same as yours, if not better sometimes. So like, why is that? And even just like social media, for example, like every app that you use knows that you're Black once you post, right? Yeah. And so there's there was a little bit of a study with people checking Black creators and what their reach potential was as opposed to white creators, and it just wasn't even comparable. So, yeah.
And their reach is because like of the way the algorithms and everything work?
Just because they're race. The algorithm recognizes they're white and they're not Black, and there's no deterrent on them. Like, given there's tons of Black creators that have, you know, made their name in different spaces, but not at nearly the amount as the white creators. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, so when you had said it initially, I thought it was like about reach. I didn't realize the same agencies will straight up pay a Black person for the same work.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And so those things kind of happen to you, or you suspect, I guess not every time you know your white.
No, I definitely know that's happened. And I know, especially when I was younger and less experienced, they were taking advantage of me with prices. Like I would say a price and it'd be like, okay, perfect. Let's go move on for it. And back then I'd be like, yes, I'm getting this money. And then, but now that I'm older, I'm like, there was no pushback. There was no renegotiation. There was none of that. And some of those deals that I did, looking back, I'm like, I should have been paid way more.
Pause. Marlon just said that Black YouTubers make less money. If you're Black and listening to this, you are probably not shocked because due to systemic anti-Black racism, we make less than our white counterparts in almost all fields. And yes, that includes medicine. But the digital world has more layers to the inequities than you probably think. There's the usual racist challenges that Marlon described, which occur in most fields, but there's yet another layer of discrimination that he didn't mention. One that actually impacts us at Race, Health, and Happiness. Digital racism. And that basically is comprised of the algorithms and the AI that a lot of social media platforms use to partially block posts that are about race, oppression, or other forms of social justice or injustice. In particular, since the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement captured the world's attention, now the AI algorithms of those platforms make sure that that sort of content is buried. It's not outright blocked. It's just buried so that very few people see it. And there's a term for it, a shadow ban. And they aren't even going to tell you it's happening when you're putting out posts on these platforms. It just happens. This has implications for Black influencers like Marlon and their incomes, but also for platforms where they're sharing our knowledge and our potential power. It is my hope that someone is working on a Black Twitter or a Black Planet Part 2, because once again, like so many times in our history, the dominant society is trying to suppress our ability to connect and share our truth. The cost is too great for our individual and collective well-being.
No, especially when I was younger and less experienced, they were taking advantage of me with prices. Like I would say a price and it'd be like, okay, perfect. Let's go move on for it. And back then I'd be like, yes, I'm getting this money. And then, but now that I'm older, I'm like, there was no pushback. There was no renegotiation. There was none of that. And some of those deals that I did, looking back, I'm like, I should have been paid way more than what I had even offered. And ethically, they should have been like, nah, this is what you should be getting paid. Like, do you know that you should be getting paid this or anything? Right. There was none of that. So, and I get it. Companies, they want to save money. I don't put it past them. And I should have done better on the negotiating side, but still it's like, it's just wrong. I feel like.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so, I don't know. So like how have you approached that? Like, do you, like now are there like Black YouTubers speaking more to white YouTubers? Like how?
Well, yeah, that transparency has definitely helped, like with people talking and stuff like that. And now I have a manager that handles rates and stuff like that, because I don't think you should be handling your own rate. It's very hard for you to determine your own worth. And a lot of times, especially as an artist, like you'll downplay whatever it is that you're doing, right? Okay. So now I have my manager and she gets me my rates and stuff like that. But other than that, I'm not too sure. I don't really Try not to pay attention to it. I'm not good with numbers. Okay. Not a fan.
Not a fan. Okay. Except for like when it comes to your bank account.
Bank account. Yeah.
Then you're a fan. You're
I can add, subtract. I can do that for sure.
Okay. And does it matter? Do you find it matters whether or not your manager is, like people are listening and trying to figure out their own careers, I imagine, and listening to this episode. Yeah. Does it matter if your manager is Black or white as far as people?
I'm not too sure. I have no idea. Mostly because especially now there's so many deals done just through email and there's never really a face-to-face until like the deal's done, for example. So I'm not too sure if it's affected me in a negative way. But as far as I'm concerned, she's done an amazing job. I do have a Black woman that's my manager. So I don't know if there's anything that's happened. She would be the one to know about it. Yeah.
Okay. And then again, like, so for you in, when it comes to issues of race, like my conversations with a number of, like my particularly Black male colleagues was, in 2020 with the murder of George Floyd, like we all know and have seen videos of Black men, being murdered by the police and, that playing over and over. But there was something about that moment that made, like just memories come back or people to think back and say like, wait a minute, right? Like that thing that I suppressed or I ignored or I said probably wasn't a big deal definitely was, me being denied opportunity or me being harassed by my teacher or whoever due to racism. Like, did you have that experience or were you kind of like, you know what? I already know this.
Yeah,
this is my...
I've been like knowing that, especially since I think Trayvon was like the big catalyst for a lot of people, including myself. To be like, why are we putting up with stuff? Why are we just saying that's the way it is? You know what I mean? Like it was difficult then. And it was especially difficult when the George Floyd thing happened because that was during the pandemic. There's nowhere you can go. Yeah. All you can do is talk. And it just seemed like every day it was getting heavier and heavier. So my thing is, especially for me as a comedian, like I don't like dark places. I'm not a fan of going there. And so like the George Floyd, it took me a long time to even watch that video, honestly.
I actually never watched the full
I've
video.
never seen the full thing. I've watched probably 10 seconds of it. I can't do that to
we don't
myself.
Need to. We know.
Yeah, I can't do that to myself. And the conversations like that just get rehashed and regurgitated and it's just too much. At a certain point, I just had to log out because I'm like, I can't keep explaining things to people, and especially as a Black person, explaining it to people who aren't Black. Right. It's tiring. It's like, it's redundant. You know what I mean? Yes. And it seems like common sense. So it's like explaining common sense multiple times. It's just annoying. Yeah,
so it's annoying and exhausting.
I just had to log out at a certain point.
But what about offline conversations? Like, so there's the conversations with non-Black people. What about conversations with other Black men and that kind of thing? Like, were folks having those conversations or was it just too much, or not folks, but like in your circles, was it too dark a place to kind of sit and
we had the conversations, but they're very brief because nobody wanted to just sit in it. And we all kind of just knew what it was. So it's like, why are we even why are we doing this? But it was more so like just checking in on each other, making sure everybody was okay and everybody was good. And like things weren't getting too heavy and stuff like that. And my friends are the type of just, it's humor all the time. So it's like, even if there is something happen, they're going to mask it with humor. Right. Yeah, it was just a lot of jokes flying around and just trying to make it lighthearted.
And I think that's important. Like, although we need to, like, we don't want to minimize something. Yeah. But at the same time, like, even me and my girls will say, like, there are certain situations, it's like, you're either going to cry, you either have to cry or you have to laugh because it's just so awful sometimes. And like, I know in your skits, you do touch on, like, you touch on some culture stuff. So I know, like, you do, like, there's the, stuff around Jamaican culture, like there's a waiting to oxtail and, but, you also touch a lot on racism, right? That's the thing that I noticed when I was listening to your Extra Gravy podcast. Yeah. And so you also kind of create skits like Today in Caucasity. And you also had a rant about like white people and bathing, which was after the
I had a whole YouTube video.
Yes. Yep. I saw that was like a 15-minute rant. But in there, you kind of like drop knowledge around issues of race and that kind of thing. So like, why do you think it's important to incorporate race? Why is it important to laugh about race? As opposed to like, there's some comedians, I guess, who just, you know what I mean? Don't go there as much maybe. But like, why for you is that important?
I just feel like it's such a dominating conversation in our culture. And at the same time, there are ways to just point out, like, I have a joke that I do on stage where I say, when I was younger, I thought white people were the ones that were oppressed. Because if you look at certain things, I just didn't understand it. Why can't you be in the sun too long? Why is the rock music so depressing and like, it's crazy and like suicidal, and the school shooters? I'm like, there's a lot happening. Why aren't the school shooters ever black? Why are the priests doing things to children that are, and they're never black? I'm like, what's going on? Right. And it wasn't until I was older, especially because you talk about the education system in Canada, there's no black history in history class. Like, you're just learning about fur for like 8 years, talking about all types of stuff, but never black people or their contributions to the country. Like, figuring out black people played hockey was mind-blowing to me. I'm like, why isn't that in our history classes? Yeah. So I didn't know that there was anything in Canada, at least, in terms of racism. From everything I saw, it was America had slavery, and America, blacks were the ones being oppressed. Until I got older and I'm like realizing things are happening to me or friends or family, and then educating myself, obviously, like, it took a while for that. So when I look at those like white skits that I do, it's more so like pointing out that like there's nobody that's better. Like, we all have our things. Like, even when I do my Jamaican skits, it's not like I'm bigging up Jamaicans the whole time. I'm showing what's wrong with us too. Right. So it's just pointing out that we're all like flawed. You know what I mean? And none of us are perfect. So what's the point of all this back and forth? Right. Yeah. So like the human essence, the humanity, and finding the common like white people bathing twice a week. That's ridiculous. That's insane. That was. I interviewed about 50 white people in like 2 hours, and maybe 3 of them said they bathe every day. And I was like, is that coincidence or is it fact? I don't know. I did the research though. So this is not from my mouth, this is from y'all. Right. And then history also points to them in Europe, ditching bathing. And so I was like, I got to present all this evidence. It's nothing evidence, I can do. No, I think, and at that time with like Ashton Kutcher and his wife, it was a lot of people. It was Ashton Kutcher. They don't bathe their kids. They don't bathe themselves. Yeah, and then there was white people on Twitter. The children smell. And I liked your comment there that like if it was black people saying we don't bathe our children, children's services would be at the door. At the door, remove the children. That's the difference. Yeah. So no, I definitely see that. Yeah. But that was a very funny time. There were lots of side conversations. White people saying they don't wash their legs. It was just a wild time. It was a wild time. I'm like, this is why we're in the pandemic. This is it. This is it. It was a historical time for sure. Now you definitely like I know that you have some, like favorite comedians that have influenced you, because you do kind of like drop knowledge as you do your comedy work. And like, I know you could probably name more, but I know you mentioned like George Carlin and Eddie Griffin. Yeah. As heroes. Are there any others? Patrice O'Neal's like my number one. Okay. He's my number one. Dave Chappelle's up there. Andrew Schultz is another one. Bill Burr. Just a lot of comedians that have been canceled. Right. I'm like, is that the hashtag cancel? I'm a big firm believer that comedy has no boundaries. So like, I don't get offended at jokes. I recognize time and place. And if they were to say those things somewhere else, maybe I'd have a problem with it. But if you're saying it on stage, I know it's sometimes comedians are saying things on stage they never wrote. So it's like, it's not even their thoughts sometimes, and people are getting mad at them. I get it. They've decided to amplify. But at the same time, it's like somebody is relating to it. Let me put it that way. Like Dave Chappelle may say what he wants, but he speaks to a certain demographic. I don't speak to that demographic. He speaks to a certain demographic. I'm not there. Not there yet. Right. And I think, I can understand that perspective. And I've heard a lot of comedians kind of have that perspective that like, that's the whole point of the art, right? Yeah. It's like, drawing something or doing something. It's art. And so there are no boundaries. I don't know if I fully agree with that. I get it. But I do find it interesting that the people that you look up to kind of
make it a point to drop knowledge at the same time as
I like line pushers because I feel like that's what comedy is supposed to be about. You're supposed to find where that line is. You know what I mean? And if it's not in the right place, push that line to where it's supposed to be. Because sometimes people think, especially with comedy, a lot of times I'll watch comedians and learn a completely different perspective on something that I never even fathomed could be a reality. And a lot of people are like, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. And it's like, whoa, it's more of like an education thing to figure out, okay, that's where you stand on this. Okay. And that's where you stand on this. It's like a barometer. I don't know how to explain it, but you get a good gauge on where people stand on issues depending on what they align with the comedy.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And so why is that important to you?
It's important to me because I feel like there's a lot of fakeness just in the world in general, and comedians we don't play that game. Like there's no time for, you can't be fake because you can get called out at any moment, and people know when people can see when you're not being yourself. So I feel like comedians are some of the last truth tellers on stage and in entertainment in general. And without it, there's a lot of discourse that doesn't happen. Like when Dave Chappelle put that special out when he was talking about transgender, there was so much conversation that happened afterwards, so much education for some people that they just weren't privy to, that it sparked a whole debate. And I think that good art sparks conversation, and comedy tends to almost always do that for me.
I like that. That's really interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I'm like, oh, okay.
I more so like the conversation that comes from art, like TV, for example. I'll watch TV, but I'll watch it on Twitter where people are talking about it. People are breaking down the plot, little Easter eggs and stuff like I love that stuff. So yeah, I love dissecting it.
That is cool. The analysis in there. And I think the other thing, so you mentioned at the beginning that you really like to distract people and, have them kind of step away from their, like their everyday issues and problems.
Yeah.
Is that something that you noticed right away as a kid? Like, if somebody in your family was feeling down, like you could lift them up? Like,
it's more of a comfortability for me, to be honest.
So it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah, it's a coping mechanism for me. Like I need people to be comfortable around me or else I'm uncomfortable. Like I don't like uncomfortability in general. It makes me uncomfortable. So like if I just met you, I don't like being cold to somebody. Like I'm going to act like I've known you for way longer than I should. Like, you know what I mean? Right. Because I don't want you to feel like you got to step on eggshells around me or anything like that. So I think it's more of a comfort thing over the years. Like I just want people to feel comfortable around me. And especially when it comes to my events, I want them to feel comfortable to know that they can have fun. Nobody's going to judge them. Like, just be yourself. So that's my main focus. Being yourself. I think that's
right.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And that's hard enough. I mean, we're living during a time where people find it really hard to be their authentic selves. And it's like very performative in the sense that, in a way that causes people anxiety. Actually, you have to act this particular way.
Exactly. So, especially having a platform, people don't show me their real selves a lot of times initially. Right. They're showing me who they think I want to converse with. Right. So it's like a lot of times I have to break down those walls during the conversation. Like, yo, I'm just a normal guy. You can have a conversation with me. So yeah.
That's cool. I think, for us, particularly as Black people, given everything that we've been through throughout the African diaspora, you have those stereotypes like Black people are jolly and you know what I mean? That even came through slavery. But I think along with like music and other forms of art, that's what has kept us, you know what I mean? Kept us well. For sure. I think the piece that you talk about of using humor and that kind of vibe to make people feel comfortable probably is related to, how people do like to go to the Caribbean and other places and feel at ease, right? Exactly. How many people got called out how many politicians got called out for going to the Caribbean during the pandemic where we're supposed to be on lockdown, but it's to like have that, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
definitely. Like we did that for ourselves at first, right? Like a lot of the coping mechanisms that we have now is because of what we had to go through and how we had to handle certain situations. So I think especially for Black people, like it's just ingrained in us, you know what I mean? And I think that's why during the pandemic, especially, was hard for me because I was like, everyone's uncomfortable. Like no one's comfortable right now. And third places are so important that like you have a third place to go. They talk about how you have your work, your home, and then you need a third place. Oh. And so when you don't have a third place and you just homework, like life seems mundane. It feels like dull. So you need that third place. You need the bar, you need the club, the comedy show, those type of places. And I feel like that's what I provide, is like I'm a third place guy.
Pause. Every now and then, a guest drops some knowledge that opens my mind. Marlon did just that when he mentioned third spaces. So I had to look it up. And that term originates from the term third place, which was coined in the 1980s by the urban sociologist Ray Oldenburg. For Oldenburg, third places were the informal public gathering places where people came together to talk, relax, rejuvenate, and create special bonds. That led to the concept of the third space, which has been used as a socio-cultural term to designate communal spaces that are not the home or the office, but the social spaces in between. Now, it seems, particularly since the pandemic, we've been able to recognize that there are communal parts of the internet that can be a third space. I personally can attest to the fact that during the pandemic, when home and work and leisure were all confined to one physical space, I actually found solace in watching Marlon's podcast, The Extra Gravy Show, which was on YouTube. I could feel relaxed, interact with other listeners in the comments section, and be distracted during a time that was one of the most challenging of my life. I encourage you to be intentional about finding a third space or many different third spaces, whether it is physical or virtual. Be intentional about seeking such spaces out and maintaining a connection to it and the people within it. We all need it. So whatever you want to call it, a third space, authentic space, the point is that it is a safe space.
I think that's why during the pandemic, especially, was hard for me, because I was like, everyone's uncomfortable. Like right, no one's comfortable right now. And third places are so important that like you have a third place to go. They talk about how you have your work, your home, and then you need a third place.
Oh.
And so when you don't have a third place and you just homework, like life seems mundane. It feels like dull. So you need that third place. You need the bar, you need the club, the comedy show, those type of places. And I feel like that's what I provide, is like I'm a third place guy.
I like that. Yeah. I've actually not heard that term, but actually like over time in this podcast, that has come up a lot.
Yeah.
For some people, it's going back, to Nigeria, the Caribbean or whatever. And for some people, it's, finding a place like the comedy or, you know what I mean? A place of creativity and to just kind of decompress. Yeah. Now, for some people, it is flying all the way back home. Do you spend time in Jamaica?
Yeah, I went to Jamaica during the pandemic.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, actually, no, I lied. It was like at the start of the pandemic, and it was like close to lockdown, but it wasn't there yet.
Okay.
I was there 2 weeks before, and then like a week after I came back, everything shut down.
You got my body language. I was judging. I was so judging. Like, I was like,
Yeah, no, they weren't flying me out. No way.
Okay. And so, do you like perform in Jamaica? Is the vibe different? Is the energy around the comedy?
Oh, I've never performed out there. My family lives in bush. Like we're not in the city at all. There's no phone, there's no Wi-Fi, there's nothing. We're just over there. I was just relaxing, honestly.
Relax. No, that makes sense. Like my mom is from like a small town in Trinidad, and they say you're living behind God's back. It's like so far in
exactly. When you got to shower outside, you live far.
you live far. Okay. So that was just like to decompress, that kind of thing. Okay. So one thing that I am very curious about that I wanted to ask you, because I saw you talk about it a little bit in an interview, on, again, going back to YouTube, and even on your podcast, I've noticed you've mentioned kind of like some of the challenges that Black women face, right? Sorry, I just had a moment, because I know there was one episode where I saw you like really talking about like women's rights and stuff like that, but your t-shirt said something about hoes be careful. So The irony just struck me as I was saying it. But you had a character called Marlena.
Marlisha, yeah.
Marlisha,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about Marlisha? Tell us about Marlisha.
Yeah, Marlisha was a character I just wanted to have, because I feel like women provide so much to Toronto culture that like I needed to have a representative of that. And I couldn't find any Black women that were willing to be on camera and do that at the time. Like nobody saw the benefit of being on YouTube or any of that stuff. So it wasn't like a top priority. Like now, if you were to ask, you'd probably get 10, 15 people.
Right.
So I was like, I'll do it myself and I'll just make it even funnier. And I asked my friend to give me the baby fat jacket. And then she just brought a wig. She's like, you should wear this. I'm like, are you serious? It still has a tag on it. She's like, just wear it. I'm like, all right.
We do our wigs with tags on it sometimes.
No, that one was ridiculous. That one is crazy. So I put it on and like just did the stereotypical things. I know the loud, very aggressive girls from my subway station used to be like. And I was just like, all right, I'm gonna do that. And then after a while, I just started noticing like, not just that people wanted to see the character, but why they wanted to see the character. And it just started like feeling very odd to me and very weird. And I remember I was watching Martin.
Right.
And I was watching Shanae.
Yeah. And
I was seeing how he was acting as Shanae. And I was like, because this is kind of like my inspiration of where I even got the idea to do the characters. Martin doing Shanae or Jamie Foxx as Wanda.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, so I had grown up seeing that. It felt normal to me. But then at the time when I was watching Shanae, I was like, why is she acting like that? Like, why is that the direction he chose to go with it? Why is that the direction we all choose to go with the character?
Right. And the characterization of Black women.
So I was like, also at that time, there's so many people messaging me saying, yo, when I come to Toronto, I watch your video first because I want to know what the slang is. And so like when people are flying in, they'd watch it as like a guide to what Toronto is. So I'm like, so they think that this is what Toronto women are then.
Black women.
Especially Toronto Black women. They think this is what they're going to get when they get here. So why am I doing that? And the other side of it, like showing the other side, is not funny. So it's like I can only go in this direction, so I might as well just not do the character at all. And I just stopped doing it entirely. And yeah, a lot of people were very mad. To this day, people ask me about that character.
But that's interesting to like decide, you know what I mean, that you know. And were you getting like Black women complaining about it or anything like that?
No, they loved, because I remember back then we loved
like Shanae, but I think that's really interesting that you thought about how, you know what I mean, you're representing Black women and what this.
Over time, like looking back at my videos, I was like, man, this is gonna be on the internet forever, and I gotta be able to stand on whatever I put out there. So it's like a lot of my relationship videos that I used to have on there, I took those down. I'm like, you're 20. What are you talking about? Like, what do you know? I'm over here talking like I'm a guys. This is what you got to do, and like I don't know what I'm talking about. So it's like so much foolishness I said in those videos. Young and impressionable as well. Like you want to impress guys, so you're saying things that will impress girls, but still keep you on the guy side. It's just stupid. So yeah, no, just reflecting back and looking at a lot of my stuff, I'm like, I don't want this to be the portrayal of me. You know what I mean? That's more so how I looked at it. I'm like, the internet is like ink. It's written in ink. You can't just take it away. People can use these Wayback Machines and look at old stuff. So yeah, I just don't want that to be the representation of me.
Okay. Yeah, no. I think that makes a lot of sense. And like, at least, you know, particularly in the lens where we look at things now, I particularly like the fact that you reflected on that, you know, Black female character and decided to shut that down. Yeah.
Because it was easy. And that's part of the other thing. It's like, it's so easy to throw Black women under the bus when it comes to those type of characters. But you don't really see that with a lot of other characters. You don't see Asian men acting like Asian women. Right. You know what I mean? Or anything like that. It's only seems to be with our race or Spanish people, especially. Like you see where those things happen a lot. But yeah, no, I wasn't in agreement with it after a while.
Yeah. Because the stereotypes do get attention. I mean, I know on Extra Gravy podcast, you were talking about that with regards to like female rappers and like, you know what I mean? Like it's the over-sexualized Black woman that gets, the
easily digestible because this is what they think already type of mold. And yeah, it's just not it's not good. And especially because I realized over time, it took me a long time to realize, because I thought everybody was watching videos like me. Like, people would take things way too literal and think that this is like real life.
Right.
And they don't understand they don't know how to discern comedy from just reality.
Yeah.
And so I was like, yeah, no, they're taking a lot of this as fact, and that's not like, that's going to get somebody in trouble. So yeah, no, overall it was just bad.
Okay. No, it's interesting because I think in comedy, again, this art for you, it's like really in balancing, you know what I mean? Like, where is that line?
Definitely.
Maybe you cross the line, you decide to backtrack, or you reassess the line over time, right?
Yeah.
And I think, again, it's such an amazing tool that helps with healing. It's hard to do as a doctor. It can be hard.
Because nobody wants to hear any humor, I guess, when they're being diagnosed.
That's right.
Am I dying or not? What's going on?
Right. Like, it's, for the person who has gonorrhea, it's not funny, right?
Yeah,
in that moment, right?
Yeah,
it's
no.
like,
That's
maybe
tough.
a comedian can make a joke about gonorrhea, but at the time that you're, So even if it's not life or death, it's it's not,
it's a touchy
not
subject.
it's not so appreciated.
No pun intended. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. But I think it's such an important tool. So I think for you, with your work, and you've looked back and thought about things that you would do differently, right?
Yeah.
But going forward, what does the future look like for you, or what do you want to kind of do over the next, let's say, 5-10 years? Like, where's Marlon headed?
Stand-up is my main thing right now. Like, that I'm just trying to grow in stand-up right now. I'm about 1.5 years in, and it's going really well. So just trying to grow in stand-up. My other events that I put together, I'm trying to grow them as well. A lot of them are still in their infancy stage, and the podcast is just going well too. So the podcast is one of those things where at first I was like, oh, gotta grow. And now I'm just like, I just want to make good episodes. Like, I don't really care about growing at all, to be honest. If it grows, it grows. If not, it doesn't. But I think I've positioned myself in a good enough place where I don't have to rely on it, and I could just treat it as like a fun hobby.
Yeah, no. And I mean, again, like I said, I'm a fan. Like, they know that I don't actually, so I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I don't follow a lot of podcasts, but I do follow yours. Yeah, you. It's a kind of vibe where everybody's just like, it's what's going on internationally, what's going on in Toronto.
Yeah.
And it actually, for me, reminds me of when I was younger, I guess a tween, and my older cousins would sit on the couch, like the guys, because they were DJs and something. Because I'm a nerd, right? I'm whatever, math and science. But then I'm sitting on the floor, and they're on the couch, and they're talking about this chick, that chick, and this party, and dub plates.
That's where I got the idea from.
Dub plates, and you know what I mean?
That's where I got the idea from. Is basically after parties, especially or little dinners, there'd be all this conversation and debates, men versus women, or aunts versus uncles, or whatever the case may be. So I was like, man, we have these conversations anyways. Why don't we just record it and put it out and just see how it goes? So yeah, it's been about 6 years now. So
that's
going
cool.
well. Yeah.
And just for the, young folks listening on the line who, a lot of people want to be YouTubers or go viral or whatever. Do you have any advice for them? You just took something happening in your own life and said, let's put it out there. But what do you recommend for folks who are interested?
I would say start. That's a big thing. As a lot of people think about doing it for a long time. Yeah. Just don't do it. Start.
Okay.
Let people dictate where your content goes. Eventually you'll find your own voice with it, and you'll be able to provide them what they want while still doing what you love. So as long as you find that balance, especially doing what you love, you're not going to do anything for a long time unless you love doing it.
Right.
And staying consistent. I think that's the number one thing. Even if you think the videos or the content is not the greatest, put it out. If there's nothing else you can do to it right now, just put it out and see what happens. And you might get people giving you advice or anything like that, where you can just grow. So yeah, I would say just staying consistent and starting. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Just start it. I think it puts people in a very vulnerable, you know what I mean? Putting stuff out there and people might not like it. Yeah. But you're saying just keep going and you'll figure it out.
It's not the end of the world. That's the thing. It's people may not like it. So what? they won't remember it. I don't remember anything I don't like. I don't remember anything I don't like. True. I remember everything that I do like. So it's if you put out something that's a miss, Okay, but what happens when you hit? They're not going to be like, oh, this guy missed. I don't like this now because he missed. No, they like it because you put it out and it's good.
All right.
Yeah.
No, that's good. That's good. So yeah, for those of you listening who are interested, just start.
Yeah.
Figure it out as you go. Now, one thing that I always also like to ask my guests is about joy. Now, obviously you do comedy and that brings people happiness, but for you personally, right? Like during times that are challenging or anything like that, what brings you joy?
My cats.
Oh, you have cats?
Yeah, I got 2 cats.
Okay.
Yeah, love my cats. Just watching movies, just hanging out. I'm not high maintenance at all. I stay home for the most part. So I just like watching a good movie, documentary, anything like that.
That's nice. What are your cats' names?
Doja and Cleo.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yes, respect to Doja and Cleo.
Yes.
And thank you so much for having.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. And I think folks definitely check out Extra Gravy Podcast. Is there anything you want to tell folks about?
No, just Extra Gravy Podcast every Wednesday. That's about it. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Marlon.
Thanks for having me.
The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast was created by Dr. Onye Norum, and she's our host. I'm Dr. Carl Cabasel, executive producer of the show. Our technical producer is Obadiah George. Our showrunner is Cam, and J.L. Joseph is associate producer. Promotions coordinator is Jordan Gibson, and Javiera Violeta Duran-Quieres is our logistics coordinator. Tamika E. Latibaudiere is our research consultant, and Corinne Bent-Womack is our anti-racism consultant. Our student associate producers are Xavier Oshinowo and Afia McIntosh. Veronica Ng is our graphic design consultant, and the RHH theme song is composed and performed by Gold Keys. Special thanks to Awit Siam and Darrell Carpentier for their voiceover work. Do you have questions, feedback, ideas to share? We would love to hear from you. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at RaceHealth&Happy, and check out the show notes for research that was referenced in this episode, as well as other bonus material. Our website is RaceHealth&Happiness.com. Thank you for listening to Race, Health, and Happiness, and please subscribe to us anywhere you get your favorite podcasts. This is Dr. Carl. On behalf of the whole RHH team, we'll talk with you soon.
The Race, Health and Happiness podcast is brought to you with help from Toronto Metropolitan University and with support from subscribers and listeners like you. Overcome the obstacles of racism while staying happy and healthy. Donate today at patreon.com/racehealthhappy. We are learning together to thrive. Thank you for your support. The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast is made better by the skills, knowledge, and creative passion of the journalism students who work right here on the show. These students join us from Toronto Metropolitan University. Thank you for the hard work, folks. We appreciate you.